We believe that in the fall of 1809, the Charbonneau family traveled to St. Louis after White Coyote was returned to our village, when all of those men were heavily armed, traveling with that group of men, accompanying White Coyote back to his village. I believe it was then that the Charbonneau family got on board those boats and headed back down the river. And why do we believe this? We believe this because this young man, Jean Baptiste Charbonneau, was baptized. He was baptized in December of 1809 at the old cathedral next to the Mississippi River in St. Louis, Missouri. His godfather was Auguste Choteau. His education under William Clark began that following year. Much has been written about Jean Baptiste Charbonneau. We can track this man's life from this point on until he died. We can look into journals and we can look into the papers of William Clark, and we can see the government money that was expended to provide for the education of Jean Baptiste Charbonneau. You can see how much his books and his shoes and all of the care provided him cost while he was in St. Louis. We believe that the Charbonneau family was there in St. Louis for a time while their son was being educated, not traveling to school from William Clark's house, because remember, William Clark promised to raise this young man as his own son. But Jean Baptiste Charbonneau did not live in the home of William Clark and his young wife, Julia Hancock. He lived some distance away in a boarding school or a boarding house for young boys that were in St. Louis attending school. This young man's life has been chronicled, and we know that by the time he was a young man, he traveled great distances up and down the Missouri River and other rivers, other tributaries of the Missouri River, serving as a scout and a guide and an interpreter for many explorers and fur traders and royalty that went through William Clark's office seeking an interpreter before they made their journey up the river and into Indian country for trade or for just exploration, for their own personal exploration of Indian country. We know that Jean Baptiste traveled with a German prince back to Europe. We know that he spent 6 years as a guest in the royal household at Bad Mergentheim, the castle of Duke Paul Wilhelm, the Prince of Württemberg. 6 years. We know that he studied some European languages while he was there. He was studying Russian. He was studying Russian before he returned here, because he and the prince, his friend were going to go off and do some more exploration in Europe. We know that Jean Baptiste Charbonneau, one of the questions that are asked about the Charbonneau family most often, does Sacagawea have any descendants? Does she have any direct descendants? We know that she has many descendants from other members of her family. We know that she has many descendants from other wives of Toussaint Charbonneau who would still be considered her descendants. It doesn't matter what tribe they belong to. They can all be considered, they are all considered part of her family too. But direct descendants, we know that while he was in Germany, Jean Baptiste Charbonneau had a wife, or he took a woman. Probably he didn't marry her, but this was his woman, I suppose, by way of traditional marriage, as was the custom of his country. She was the daughter of a military man. Her name was Anastasia Fries. And we know that they had a child together, and this young child's name was Anton Fries. And we know that this young child, this young boy, died in infancy. So we do know that while he was in Germany, Jean Baptiste Charbonneau had a son. He came back to this country and he continued his travels to the west. He served in the Mexican War as a scout and a guide for General Stephen Kearny. Stephen Kearny was the stepson-in-law of William Clark. He traveled west with the Mormon battalion. He served as sort of a liaison between the Indian people and the missions that were established out in the southwestern part of this country. He traveled out toward California during the gold rush, and he would remain there. He would remain there for most of his adult life. And then he heard, he was a clerk. He was a clerk at a hotel in Auburn, California. We often ask, we know that this young man was educated. He was very different than most young Indian men of his time. He was a half-breed Indian. That wasn't uncommon. There were many people who were of French descent and of Indian heritage. Even on the expedition, there were men whose fathers were French, whose mothers were Indian, Shawnee, Omaha, and various other tribes. But Jean Baptiste Charbonneau was an educated young man. For some people, he was something of a curiosity, because most Indians of that time did not have the kind of education that Jean Baptiste was afforded under the guidance of William Clark. And people wonder, people ask, did he keep a journal? Did he write letters? Where are his journals? Well, you know, I'm guessing, I believe that this young man kept a journal. He probably kept a journal of many of his travels. Most of those fur traders that he traveled with were keeping journals and records themselves. But this hotel, the hotel that this man was the clerk for, burned down. Everything he owned was lost in that fire. And so if he kept a journal, we'll never know what he wrote. He heard about the gold rush in Montana, and he journeyed north. He journeyed north, and he was traveling. He was planning on traveling out into what is now Montana. And when he crossed the Owyhee River in Oregon, near the borders of Oregon and Idaho, he became ill. He became sick. He had a fever. He had pneumonia, and he died. Jean Baptiste Charbonneau, the son of Toussaint Charbonneau and Sacagawea of the Lewis and Clark expedition, died in May 1866 at the age of 61. We don't know who his descendants are. We don't know if he left a family, if he had a family while he was in California. That was the end of his life.